During the 3 weeks, the Rebbe instituted that we should learn about the laws of the Beis HaMikdash and how it functioned and what each of the rooms and vessels and the size and the shapes and the meaning and purpose behind everything. It says that every generation who the Beis HaMikdash was not built in their days, it's as if the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And the Rogatchover explains that this is kind of, it's not just a once in a generation. It's as if it's destroyed. It's every day. It's as if it's continuously being destroyed. And how could we, even the most cold-hearted Jew, how could he stand by and watch the temple be burnt in front of him? So we have to do everything we can. So especially now in the 3 weeks from the 17th of Tammuz until the 9th of Av, we should work hard and learn more and do more acts of goodness and kindness, but especially to learn the laws of the Beis HaMikdash and learn about the Beis HaMikdash. So we have Rabbi Kessler here to give us some inspiration and some insight into the Beis HaMikdash.
Thank you. Today, I mainly want to focus on the topic of korbanos, sacrifices. I want to mainly focus on one question. In order to answer that question, I have to go into a lot of background. But first, let me just jump right into the question. The question is that today, we don't have sacrifices, but instead of sacrifice, we have prayer. And the Gemara says that the reason why we pray 3 times a day is because our prayer takes the place of sacrifices. Now, the truth is, if we think about it, there's 2 ways to experience closeness to God. One is through a sacrifice, and the second is through prayer. And I think it's not so clear to all of us which one is the easier way of connecting to God and becoming close to God. Now, this concept, which we have in many mitzvahs, we have the ideal mitzvah, the way it's spoken in a chumash, then we have the substitute mitzvah. We have, for example, on the Seder plate, we have an egg in the Seder plate. The egg in the Seder plate is a substitute for the chagiga, the celebratory sacrifice the Jew brings when they visit the temple 3 times a year. Now, over there, I think it's clear to most people that the experience of having the egg on the plate pales in comparison to the experience of going to the Beis HaMikdash, to the temple, and bringing the sacrifice. And the same thing we have, we shake the lulav and esrog. We shake the lulav and esrog every single day of Sukkot. The time of Beis HaMikdash, they did not shake the lulav and esrog every single day. But we do it to commemorate the experience that happened in the Beis HaMikdash when they walked around the Mizbeach every day with the Arava. But there are certain things that the substitute becomes even more significant than the original. What? Oh. So we have to figure out how. First, let's talk about the what. One of the main examples of this is our topic, is prayer versus sacrifice. The Talmud already says that prayer is much greater than sacrifice. This is in the Talmud Brachos, page 32b. It says that prayer is much better, and he goes even further. That God tells the Jews, I don't want your sacrifices because you don't focus on me and you don't have a meaningful relationship with me. You're going to bring the sacrifice, and you think that everything is forgiven, and you don't repent yourself. Versus a prayer has a much more meaningful experience.
Was that written while the Beis HaMikdash?
After. Yeah. This idea is not just in the Talmud. It also makes it in a lot of Kabbalistic works. One of the main places is in Likkutei Torah. The Alter Rebbe talks about this idea, and he says that what we accomplish through our prayer in a way is more significant than a sacrifice accomplishes. And it's in 2 ways. One is is the goal of a sacrifice is a closeness that a Jew comes to Hashem, and that's why a korban means lashon kiro, closeness, and a Jew experiences the closeness more by prayer than by sacrifice. And number two is in the reach and the choyach, and the result of the sacrifice, the pleasure that God has of the sacrifice. In a way, God has more pleasure from the prayer than the sacrifice. And that's clear what the Gemara in Brachos is talking about, that God says He appreciates the prayer more than the sacrifice. Let me give you another example of this concept. This is an example that is one of the very famous Maimonim that the Rabbi speaks about. The famous Maimon Ba'ata Sava. Now, the truth is, this idea exists everywhere. It says, but over there it talks about that Moshe should collect olive oil from every Jew, right? Now, the Chassidus explains that the concept of collecting olive oil to every Jew is that it's important for Moshe to have a relationship to every Jew. And Moshe's relationship to every Jew brings him closer to God. Now, in that time, in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, they don't focus on that concept. They focus on the simple symbolism of bringing the olive oil. Now we don't have the olive oil. Therefore, we focus on the closeness that every Jew has to have with the Moshe Rabbeinu. And it seems like that our conversation today is much more significant. Okay, this is not yet the question. This is the prop for the question. Question comes strong because the Ramban in Nevuchim, in the third volume, which he talks about the significance of mitzvahs in chapter 46, he talks of the purpose of korbanos and why God gave the command of korbanos. And we're going to discuss a controversy around it. But first, let's hear what the Ramban has to say. The Ramban says what happened was that when the Jews left Mitzrayim, they were very used to the idol worship, the customs of idol worship of the Egyptians. And their custom was to have sacrifice, human sacrifice, non-human sacrifice, animal sacrifices. And all of it is about serving idols. And in order for God wanted to wean the Jews off idol worship, and therefore He said, listen, do the sacrifice, but don't do the way the Egyptians do it, which is for idols, but do it instead for me. It was, in a way, the Ramban explains it was somewhat of a concession, the recognition that if you tell the Jews then that you don't need a sacrifice, there's a way to serve God without sacrifices. No one is capable to hear it then. They're too entrenched in the custom of a desire. So instead, God said, we'll do a sacrifice, but not in the way that was done in the Egyptian customs. We'll do it different ways. And the Ramban continues with this theme further and further and explains all the korbanos, both the animal sacrifice, the bird sacrifice, korban pesach, with this general theme. The truth is, the Ramban also explains that the Mishkan is also a concession. How the Ramban explains the concession of the Mishkan is that the Jews were used to temples of idol worship in Egypt. And in the Ramban's world, the purest way to serve God is everyone could just serve God based on the Torah mitzvah, just based on the pure experience. You don't need a temple. But it was a concession that all organized religions had. And therefore, God said you could have a temple, but do it in this way. Now, this might seem, according to Ramban, again, we're not going to stay here, but it might seem, according to Ramban, that the Mishkan, and really even the synagogue, is something that's secondary, because people have a hard time connecting to God by themselves, and they need the communal elements and the social element that brings them together. All this comes together to one question, which is there are some people that want to argue, based on the Ramban and Nevuchim, that when Mashiach will come, there won't be any sacrifices. And the reason is because if the purpose of sacrifice is a concession because of idol worship tendencies, when Mashiach will come, there's no need to make any concessions. And therefore, there won't be any need for sacrifices. Now, this doesn't mean, even according to the people that make this argument, this doesn't mean that we hold this approach. The question only is, does the Ramban have this opinion? And particularly the Ramban in his Guide to the Perplexed, the Moreh Nevuchim. Now, this argument also fits with another argument that some Jews have, that when Mashiach will come, all Jews will become vegan. Part of this argument is that eating animals is a concession, and if we go through the history of eating animals in the time of Noah, it wasn't allowed, and then pre-Noah it wasn't allowed, and then it was a concession because it was people were so addicted to meat, and therefore they lost all sense of humanity, and therefore God allowed them to do it. But as long as the animal is not alive, that was a concession. So to tame humanity, that you could eat meat, but as long as the animal is killed first. And then throughout the desert, when Hashem gave the Torah, there was a secondary idea, which is non-Jews can eat meat, but Jews should not be eating meat unless it's connected to a sacrifice. The idea was basar taiva, meat for no purpose, just for pleasure, not part of a sacrifice. That a small portion could be eaten by a Jew, that should not be allowed to be eaten. Now, when the Jews came into Eretz Yisrael, it wasn't realistic anymore because in the desert, everyone lived within a couple mile proximity to the Mishkan. So anyone wanted to have meat for dinner, they just brought a sacrifice that night, took home some meat to eat. But once the Jews went to Eretz Yisrael, and they were so scattered that they only went to the Beis HaMikdash 3 times a year. Not everyone had the capability to go to the Beis HaMikdash on a regular basis, and therefore the concession was that people could eat meat on a regular basis. The question is, when Mashiach will come, is that concession going to be gone? And therefore, will Jews become vegan again? And there's 2 elements to it. Number 1 is vegan because only with a carbon, or number 2 is even if there's no korbanos, then meat will be fully out of the table. There was just an example of a very famous rabbi, Rabbi Cook, in Eretz Yisrael. He personally, a lot of students say he was a vegan. And he also said that Mashiach will come, will be a vegan. Many people claim that he also held to this opinion of lack of sacrifices when Mashiach will come. I'm just quoting this just to point out it's not it's not just very modern rabbis, but some great rabbis held to this opinion that Jews and Mashiach will come will be vegan, and possibly based on that, no sacrifice as well. Okay, now the question is twofold. Whether we accept that the one option is there will not be any sacrifice when Mashiach will come, or even if we go with the approach and there will be sacrifice, the question is, it doesn't seem like it has so much spiritual meaning as prayer. Prayer, especially if we develop it and cultivate it, could be so spiritual and so meaningful. But a sacrifice, number 1 is, besides the fact that it doesn't seem so meaningful, it also it could offend our sensibilities, our Western sensibilities. And prayer seems much more spiritual. And the question is, such a mundane physical thing, especially if it seems like a son of concession, doesn't make sense that Mashiach will come, our main connection to God will be through a sacrifice. Okay, that's the question. Now, in order to answer this, I want to go back and zoom out a drop and understand what the purpose of the temple in general is, and the big debate between the Rambam and the Ramban. And this is going to influence strongly how we approach this topic. So just to point out what we're going to be doing, I'm going to go through the debate of why the Beis HaMikdash and the Mishkan is built, what's the purpose of it, and then discuss when Mashiach will come, how integral every part of the Beis HaMikdash is, and then we'll zoom out and ask some basic questions of connecting to mitzvahs, physical versus spiritual, and where is the ultimate way of connecting, and then we'll come back. Okay, let's get started. The Rambam in his Code of Jewish Law, in his Sefer Yad, in the opening section to the laws of the Beis HaBechirah, to the laws of Beis HaMikdash, right? So the purpose of the Beis HaMikdash is a place to bring sacrifices, which is very, very interesting because according to Rambam, the central point of this is so different from his approach in the Nevuchim, and I'm going to deal with it soon. He said that the whole purpose is to bring sacrifice and nothing else. And the Rambam's approach, because that is that every single detail of the Mishkan revolves around the sacrifice. Even the fact that there is a aron and a place that God speaks is just that people should know that this is a place they can bring sacrifices. It's a holy space. It's a holy space because God speaks there and God reveals himself there. But what's the purpose of a holy space? And therefore people could come and bring a sacrifice. The central idea is a sacrifice. However, the Ramban famously argues with the Rambam, and he says sacrifices is a very, very secondary point of the building of the Mishkan. According to Ramban, the main point of the Mishkan is a place that God reveals himself. And to say it this way is like this. In most places of the world, people are confused. It's not clear if God's presence is significant. The reality of God is not always so clear to every person. And even further it's not always so clear what God wants. So to have one place that there's absolute clarity in every single element of a person's life, clarity of the existence of God, clarity of what the message of God is, to have one place of clarity, the Jews can come there and can experience that clarity. That's the goal of the Mishneh. Now, different Jews experience the clarity different ways. The Kohen Gadol, when he goes into the Holy of Holies, he experiences clarity in a much, much deeper way than the regular Jew. But the purpose of the Mishkan is a place to experience the clarity of God. In a way, we could break it up in these two approaches philosophically, what the goal of the Mishkan, the Beis HaMikdash is. One is God's gift to the world. That as much as we're going to be stuck in our mundane life and we'll have confusing elements and we're not sure what's right and wrong, God gives us a gift. There's one place we have clarity. And we can go to that place and have clarity and connect to God in that place. That's the approach to the Ramban. That's a gift that God gives us. Or the different approach, the Rambam it's not God's gift, it's man's gift to God. It's a place that a man works and brings sacrifice and comes closer to God. So both can obviously recognize the place that a Jew and God connect to. The question is it a gift from God, or is it man or man working himself to come close to God? Now, based on this, one might say that it would make more sense in the Ramban's approach that when Mashiach will come, maybe sacrificing are not so necessary. All right? But the central point of the Mishkan altogether is just the relation of God. And therefore, as long as we have the relation of God, that's fine. But the Rambam that says that the purpose of the Mishkan is to bring sacrifices, the question is, the Beis HaMikdash, is that true as well? And if it is, why is it so important? Okay. One more point is the Rambam's introduction to the Mishneh Amidus. Mishneh Amidus talks about the building of the Beis HaMikdash and the structure of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rambam has an introduction to talking about the value and purpose of why we're even learning about these laws. And he says like this, the reason why these laws are important is because we have to know how to build in the future. And therefore, everything that it says over here and the details and the structure and what the service is all for the Beis HaMikdash as well. Now, let's think for a second if we could mend together two worlds from the Rambam in his Moreh Nevuchim that says sacrifices are God's concession, right? Versus the Rambam Mishneh Torah. So before we get any answer, let's make the problem even bigger. The Rambam in the end of his in the end of the book where it talks about the laws of Mashiach, he talks about the development of the world. What will the world look like when Mashiach? And he talks about the criteria of what Mashiach is. And he says, in order for Mashiach to be established as a definitive ruler of Mashiach, he has to accomplish a couple things. Now, one is he has to destroy Amalek. Number two is he has to gather all the Jews together. And number 3 is he has to build a Beis HaMikdash.
What was the first one?
Wipe out Amud. Okay, so now what's interesting is the Rambam says that one of the criteria is to build a Beis HaMikdash, right? Now the Rambam's opinion is that the definition of the Beis HaMikdash is to bring sacrifices, right? So it comes out a prerequisite to the time of Mashiach is, according to Rambam's opinion, the bringing sacrifices. So the question is even more is the Rambam in Mishneh Torah clearly says that by definition the Mashiach means sacrifices. So we might say that other mitzvahs we could ask questions about, right? Well, the answer is all mitzvahs are the same. But especially regarding the Beis HaMikdash, it's obvious in the Rambam's world himself that sacrifice must be a central part. The question is, does it fit with the Moreh Nevuchim? So we're going to go through a couple steps understanding this. Okay, step 1 is like this. There's a big debate in how to understand the book of Moreh Nevuchim, which I'm sure some of you heard some of the controversy about it. Just some brief highlights in this. In the 13th century, there was a group of rabbis that decided that they had to ban the book of Moreh Nevuchim because it said things that were uncommon to Jews, to what Jews normally learns, and they felt that it went against Jewish values. So much so that there were a group of rabbis in France that wanted to collect all the books of Moreh Nevuchim and burn them. They got the Pope involved and they're trying to burn it as well.
Moreh Nevuchim is the guide to the perplexed.
Yeah.
They like his other works?
Most of his other works I like, besides the first book of his Mishneh Torah, the book of knowledge, because it also talks about philosophic ideas and unity of God, and they didn't agree with some of the points. Particularly, they didn't agree with the fact that it doesn't mention anywhere of the punishment of Gehenna, of hell. He doesn't mention that at all, and some other ideas. So that book and the Guide to Reflex. So many people say that there's many arguments that either the Ramban went off the deep end in the Guide to Perplex, and therefore that book is different, or he had a different intention. He wrote it for the perplexed, but therefore the ideas in the Guide to Perplex don't match the Rambam's internal ideas, what he believes in. It's more apologetic. It's and it's not the Rambam's true beliefs and values. Now, there's a couple times that the Rabbi by Farbrengen spoke about this, and he said something very interesting. He said that anyone who believes that the Rambam, the Mishneh Torah, and the Rambam, the Guide to Reflex, are two different peoples or two different values, must be a wild, unintelligent person. Because wild means that it's so out there, that idea, and it must be and is not thinking straight. The Rebbe is very strong in advocating that everything in the Rambam fits with the Mishneh Torah, with the Guide Perplex. Now, this is not so simple, but the precedent for it is just an interesting story of the Rogatchover. The Rogatchover guy in Rabbi Rosen was a brilliant man that the Rebbe learned from and corresponded with a lot. And there were different opinions of how to understand the Rambam correctly. Throughout history, since the Rambam, his book, he writes that no one needs any books after his book. And since then, there's the most amount of commentaries on any Jewish book is the Rambam's book. And there's so many problems and questions. The question is, what's the key to unlock the Rambam? Are there different books that he had that we don't have? What's a different method that we figure out, if we break the code, we could answer all the questions of the Rambam? So throughout history, there are different rabbis that suggest different ideas. One of the ideas that the Rabbi Rosen suggested is if you understand the Guide to Perplex and use the principles of the Guide to Perplex, you'll break the code of Mishneh Torah, which is a fascinating concept. He says the philosophic ideas of the Guide to Perplex show you how the Rambam's mind works. And if you see how the Rambam's mind works and you apply it to every question you have, you'll get the answer. And that's what he went about doing. And his whole life, he was connected to these two books. and he went through it, and when it goes through his books, you recognize everything he answers is based on the principles and values, philosophic rules of the Gaish Reflex. It seems like whether the Rebbe was very influenced with this idea, but went in with this path. What I'm going to focus mainly on is how to see this, particularly in our subject of sacrifices, and then we'll begin our journey. In volume 3, chapter 46, elementary 4, when he talks about sacrifices, he talks about that all sacrifices, their reasons are obvious because to wean Jews off idol worship. But then he mentions that there are certain details of the sacrifice. For example, why this sacrifice has to be a year old, and why the sacrifice has to be slaughtered on this side of the altar. Those are things we don't understand. He calls them chukim. And he said, then he goes, and he almost, if you go through Nevuchim, you'll see this trend throughout the whole Guide for Flex. Whenever he gives a really rational approach to a mitzvah, he says the rational approach just explains the broad strokes of the mitzvah, but the certain details of the mitzvah never make sense. And here the obvious question is, how do we deal with this? It seems like that if you were to argue that the reason for the mitzvah is because of the reason, then everything should make sense. And if something don't make sense, then the question is, they shouldn't exist. How do we blend the two together? The fact that certain things are so rational and certain arguments in that rational point don't make sense whatsoever. It's like a person writing a paper and rationally explaining every single point of their argument, and a couple of footnotes saying this point doesn't make sense, but it's still the whole argument still stands. This detail has perplexed many people in the study of the Guide of Reflex. It's been a big problem. The Rebbe had a central point of how he viewed mitzvahs that he applied to the Guide of Reflex, which really was helpful, how to understand mitzvahs in general, and also how to understand the relationship of these two books. There are two ways to say this statement, and I'll say both of them. One is that we talk about that in mitzvahs as three categories. There's mishpatim, mitzvahs that are rational, edus, symbolic mitzvahs, and chukim, non-rational mitzvahs. And the question is, are there just three different types of mitzvah? And obviously, if the three types of mitzvah means that we relate to Hashem differently in every mitzvah. For example, the mitzvah of not to kill, that's a mishpat, right? That's a rational mitzvah. And it would make sense that a person when approaching this mitzvah should not just say that I have every desire to kill, and I want to do it, but I don't have a choice. God tells me I can't do it, so I'm holding myself back. Obviously, it would be more appropriate that a person should intellectually connect and emotionally connect to this mitzvah and feel that it's terribly wrong to do it. However, the mitzvah of shatnez, for example, of not to wear wool linen, a garment of wool linen together, would make sense that a person might want to wear the garment, and it might feel as comfortable. Nevertheless, they recognize that God tells them they shouldn't do it, and therefore they want to do it. And there's nothing wrong with a Jew having that approach. What's interesting is that the Rabbi says that the reason why there are some mitzvahs that are non-rational, certain mitzvahs are rational, is because really every mitzvah has to have elements of both. When it comes to the rational mitzvahs, for example, the example of, let's say, not killing, we have to have an emotional, intellectual connection to the mitzvah. But it's also important we have a submissive connection to the mitzvah, which is that it's true that we recognize that it's intellectually wrong, it's emotionally wrong, and we connect to the mitzvah fully. But we should also recognize it's also wrong because God told us it's wrong. And that will protect us in times that we might just find it as justified, and we feel the emotional justification for it. We always have the guardrail that we know God tells us not to as well. And the same thing is in mitzvahs that are not rational. We should try to find one element of the mitzvah that we could connect to, and therefore make it personal. And the truth is, if you look at Shlomo, that was Shlomo's job his whole life. He tried to make a personal connection to every mitzvah. And therefore he searched in every mitzvah, what's that hook, that emotional connection he connected? Based on this, we can understand very well that according to this, we have a central approach of how to look at mitzvahs. The central idea of every mitzvah is that mitzvahs are because God gave it to us, and they don't have to make sense. And the truth is, it doesn't make sense, they would make sense. Because if it comes from God and God is infinitely greater than us, his logic wouldn't make sense to us. And if we do make sense out of it, then this is probably not exactly what he meant. And therefore, mitzvahs inherently should not make sense. But God gave a secondary gift to mitzvahs, that he gave us a way to connect it emotionally, intellectually as well. But as much as we're going to connect to the mitzvah, that's not the real meaning of the mitzvah. The real meaning of the mitzvah is a gift that God gave us, and a gift God cannot be explained. Okay, based on this, we can understand the Rambam's approach. The Rambam is going to make sure, as much as the mitzvah is rational, he's always going to remind us, but in its core, no mitzvahs are fully rational. Even the mitzvahs that make the most sense. The Rambam particularly has this need more than anyone else to remind us this concept. Since the Rambam has taken the approach of Shleimer to try to make an emotional connection to every single mitzvah, he has to remind us even more that every mitzvah has a deeper meaning. Okay. Based on this, obviously the conclusion is that the Rambam's approach is that the sacrifices are not here just to wean us off idol worship. But it does that benefit as well. It has a side benefit. And God wants us to recognize that benefit because it'll help us wean us off from idol worship. Is that the ultimate value of the sacrifice? Absolutely not. There's a deeper value that God just recognizes. This is a gift that he gave us as a method of us connecting to him. That is point number one when we understand this concept of how the Rambam views mitzvahs, and based on that, how to connect the world of the Sefer Yad and the world of Mishneh Torah. Then there's another idea that the Rebbe talks about as well in the Rambam's world, which is there's certain ideas that are true in their abstraction, and certain ideas that are so true that any single angle you look at it will always be true. And since God is infinitely true, every angle you look at God will be true. The Rabbi uses this idea to explain sometimes that many people will approach a mitzvah and they'll find a beautiful way how they connect to the mitzvah. Sometimes in ways that it's not mentioned in any books. Some people might feel that Shabbos is so nice because I don't have electronics and it's mentally relaxing. And therefore their approach to Shabbos is it's a mentally relaxing time, therefore I enjoy Shabbos. Does Torah say that's the value of Shabbos? No. Does Torah say that's what we should celebrate Shabbos? No. But the question is, did God have that in mind as well when he gave Shabbos? The answer is obviously. Because if Shabbos is the ultimate true experience that a Jew could have, then it must have every single possible expression of truth. And every connection a Jew has to it is true as well. And therefore, by the Rama finding different ways how we connect to every mitzvah, that's God's intention as well, even though it's not the central point of a chayk. Okay. This all explains just one point. This so far took us to the place that even though it seems like that the Rambam says the purpose of korbanos is to wean us off the sensibilities, wean us off of idol worship, and that is not present today, and it's not for sure will not be present when Mashiach will come. There's deeper values to korbanos, and therefore still important to bring a carbon. But the question still stands. The first question we ask, which is, isn't prayer much more meaningful than a sacrifice? And the question is, why a sacrifice? There's a beautiful expression in the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, has a very long discourse that spans 5 years. It's some of you maybe heard of it. It's called Hemshech Hayim Beis. And he talks over there different levels of people's lack of belief in God. And one of the things he talks about is fascinating. He says, and this relates directly to our subject, and then we'll make it a little broader after. He said that certain people, when they think of a God, they they believe that God created the world, obviously. And they have full belief in God. Again, we're talking about sophisticated problems. So God for sure created the world. And therefore, we have to recognize that obviously our source of business obviously comes from God. And we're not independent being. And we have to recognize all our blessings come from God, and God is involved in every single moment of our life. A Jew also believes that they're capable to connect to God. And the way to connect to God is through being in a spiritual state of praying and learning and studying about God. But one thing a Jew has a hard time doing is connecting the two worlds. A Jew feels, this is the Jew that's not a full believer, that there's no meaning to physical mitzvahs. A physical mitzvah is physical, and that doesn't have so much value. So he says like this: if I want to be spiritual, I'm going to pray. If I want to recognize the existence of God, I'm obviously going to do everything that's right. And I might even listen to everything that God says. I'll put on tefillin because God wants to put on tefillin. But putting on tefillin is not a spiritual experience. That's the claim. And the Rebbe Rashab discussing it says that's really a Jew not having full belief in God. And that's what we want to develop. He says a true belief in God is that the gap between physical and spiritual doesn't really exist. Because in God's world, it doesn't really exist. And therefore, a Jew could connect to God and feel spiritually inspired through connecting to the physical thing, just like it's connected to the spiritual thing. The approach, therefore, he says is when a person puts a mezuzah on his door, and a person puts on tefillin, it could be just as a spiritual experience as opening a siddur and davening. Davening might be overtly more spiritual, or let's go even further examples. When a person is involved in business and is honest in his business and doesn't steal from his friend, doesn't cheat his friends, so there feels like he's just behaving to God's rules, right? God's rule is don't steal because it's my world and behave in an appropriate way, but it's not a spiritual experience. That's something between me and another person. So the Rebbe Rashab says, no, that's a spiritual experience as well, because in God's world, the worlds are not so separate. That's idea number one. Idea number two is the Rebbe explains that many times we have a mitzvah that we experience just in a spiritual way. For example, the korban chagiga we mentioned before on the Passover plate, we have an egg for the korban chagiga. The truth is, the egg is not really necessary, because what's the principle we always know? You want to resemble and bring a sacrifice today. What do? We study and meditate about the sacrifice. So why is it necessary to have an egg? The explanation is because if we were to meditate, it would be very limited how much we can connect to God. God gives us every single mitzvah as a gift, that channel is a way to connect. So physical mitzvahs, every physical mitzvah is a gift to God, and it says, you're going to connect to me on my terms, not based on your understanding. What happens if we don't have a physical mitzvah? We could have a spiritual idea, but it doesn't take the same place as the gift that God gave us. We could replicate it. We could try to connect to God and try to replicate the idea, but there's a certain special power by God giving us this exact path and saying, do this, and this, there's spiritual power, you can unlock it. It's almost like there is like a school, like the magical element that exists in every mitzvah God gives us in a physical way. So the Rabbi says that's why we take the egg. The egg is some way to help, somehow to help us by the physical act to connect to the spiritual idea. Now, bring this all together, it's very hard for us to understand today how sacrifice will make us closer to God. We feel that by praying we come closer to God. That's because we see the difference between the physical and spiritual. And we think spiritual ideas are through a spiritual experience. Physical things don't have a spiritual experience. That's not a problem that started today. It's a problem that started at the time of the Beis HaMikdash. When Jews went to basically brought a sacrifice, they didn't feel close to God. And God said, I'm not happy with sacrifices. But when Mashiach will come, the one thing that will happen that Chassidus always talks about is a blend between the physical and the spiritual. And therefore, people will look at the physical world and feel spiritually inspired. Not just to recognize that God created it, but to feel spiritual presence of God. If that's the case, the bringing of the sacrifice in time of Mashiach, every person will feel the spiritual connection to God. And not only that, it'll be far greater than prayer, because prayer is something that we have to we have to muster all the strength in ourselves and meditate to come to a place of closeness. Bring the sacrifice will be blown away just by the physical experience of the sacrifice that will feel the ultimate closeness. Finish up with the idea that Ramban says, that the Rabbi always says about learning these ideas. The more we learn about the Mashiach, and especially this idea of learning about how sacrifice will exist by Mashiach, the ultimate idea of a sacrifice will blend the two ideas of the prayer and sacrifice together, is both something that helps us bring Mashiach by learning about it, and also makes our appetites wet and makes us excited for the time of Mashiach. Thank you.